What is it? More brutes?
Worse.
I forgot something. My name. I forgot.
What is it? That stench. I've smelled it before.
Oh, God. You don't want Earth. You want heaven.
A reclaimer? At last! We have much to do! This facility must be activated if we are to control this outbreak!
Keys. Take him. Captain. Service number 196-199. JK. You will not have me.
We already do.
The Flood may return in Halo Infinite, and it dawned on me that we haven't faced the Flood in a mainline Halo game since Halo 3. Reach 4 and 5 don't incorporate them at all. Also, I realized that whenever I try to look at the brighter side of Halos 4 and 5, one of the points I make is that you don't fight the Flood in either of those games. Seriously, I have a friend who loved Halo 4, says he likes it more than Halo 3. We're having a little back and forth because my stance on that is neither are better than Reach, but I do wholeheartedly believe Halo 3 is better than Halo 4 in most, if not all, aspects. Real talk, I don't even like Halo 4. Passing on it was a matter of choice. Passing on Halo 5 was a matter of circumstance. Didn't have an Xbox One. I was telling him how, in general, people see 3 as the gold standard for Halo. That, generally speaking, most people are going to say Halo 3 is the best Halo. But then he's like, at least Halo 4's campaign didn't make us fight the Flood. And I legit thought for a second, oh man, he's right. He's completely right. That's completely accurate, and that's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, the Flood are one of, if not the most important aspects of Halo. Their lore runs deeper into the Halo mythos than any other aspect of Halo. I have to ask you viewing this video right now, though, have you seen the polls by bigger Halo channels? The ones asking what the worst missions in the Halo campaigns are? It's always a Flood-centric level. It doesn't matter what community page you're on. It always comes down to the library, Quarantine Zone, and Cortana in CE 2 and 3 respectively. I don't agree entirely. I would say personally, 2 Betrayals, High Charity, and yeah, Cortana are the worst levels. Like, just the worst campaign missions. All of them do involve the Flood. Then I realized, though, my favorite missions in the first 3 Halo games, respectively, are 343 Guilty Spark. It's when we're first introduced to the Flood. Quarantine Zone, which is a level where you play as the Arbiter. It's after you get past the Sentinel Wall. And the Covenant. Even though you don't fight against the Flood show up at the very end of that mission. All levels that involve the Flood in some aspect, regardless. So I thought we'd look at the Flood and see what makes us love and hate the parasite so much, and maybe how they could be incorporated in Halo Infinite. For those who don't know, the Flood is a parasitic infection that led to the end and new beginning of all sentient life in the galaxy. The reason that the Forerunners, the most advanced race in the Halo universe, had to build the Halo rings. The Forerunners basically accepted defeat and decided to wipe out all life, and use their technology to bring it back at a later point, wiping themselves out in the process. Fast forward to the events of Halo Combat Evolved, and the contained and quarantined Flood samples left over from Forerunner experimentation are released by the Covenant, leading to humanity's first contact with the Flood. The Flood spread in 2 ways. The first way is direct contact from their spores containing Flood supercells. This process is slow and mostly dealt with in extended media. Those infected this way tend to mostly look like their normal selves, just with Flood tissues and sensory organs sticking out of them. You don't deal with enemies like this in-game. The closest you get is meeting a Marine that has just killed his own squad in the mission Floodgate. saying that he could see it crawling under their skin. The corpses don't look infected upon inspection, but trust me, you can take his word for it. The second and more known way is through infection forms, small spider-like organisms that house flood spores. These creatures will find living or recently killed organisms of suitable size and neuroactivity and burrow into their chest cavity. Upon entering the host, they will begin to disperse flood spores, and they will take direct control of the nervous system, rapidly altering the host anatomy, consuming their biomass and replacing it with their own. Similar to that of cordyceps in various arachnids and insects, it's a parasitic mushroom that behaves very similarly, till you're left with a mangled walking corpse with unrivaled hostility and a drive to spread. These are called combat forms. Flood combat forms maintain the memories and knowledge of the host so they can use weaponry and drive vehicles. Whatever weapon was in the corpse's hands, they can still operate. Combat forms eventually become carrier forms. Large pustulating masses that are so heavily pressurized with flood spores they explode with more force than a grenade. When a carrier form explodes, several infection forms will fly out and the cycle starts over. As you can see, the Flood borrow very heavily from the Alien series, in that they're an organism that has a reproduction cycle that depends on the suffering and destruction of all other life around it. The Flood will even cake the walls with their own biomass as they accrue more from consuming and eating other species, very similar to the way that aliens will secrete hive material all over the walls. The Flood, however, use the biomass on the walls to eventually create pure forms, Flood that exist without the use of a host. They just take the mass and create bodies and forms that suit their purposes. You fight pure forms in Halo 3, and in Halo 2 we were introduced to the Gravemind, the massive central intelligent representation of the Flood hive mind, with knowledge that dates back all the way to before the firing of the first Halo array.
What is that?
This all sounds amazing to me. Aliens is my favorite science fiction film of all time, one of the coolest and most interesting aspects of Halo. Some of the best extended media involves the Flood. Have you ever read the comic of how Ratas Vadum, the shipmaster, loses half of his face? It's awesome. So why do we hate fighting them? Why do we say our least favorite Halo missions involve the Flood? The harsh reality is their mechanics are obnoxious. The Flood aren't like any other adversary. Every other enemy you fight in Halo has a certain amount of life preservation in their game plan. They all have realistic behaviors. Jackals and grunts will flee. Brutes will get angry and berserk as a last-ditch effort. Elites will strafe, evade, seek cover when their shields are down. Hunters are covered in armor. Yamne A fly. It's obvious every enemy in the Covenant wants to live.
Elites are a bitch, but at least they're smart, right? Makes them predictable.
The Flood doesn't care. They will run at you full force. In fact, killing themselves to kill you is a reoccurring theme. The infection forms will pop because they can't get through your shields or your armor, so they'll pop, explode, and it deals damage to you. The carrier forms also pop, and that'll kill you outright. Oh, and they'll randomly fall from high places or be around corners that you would have no way of knowing they were there. So, much like Dark Souls, it's the idea, oh, you should have been on your toes. There's no way I could have done this without dying. That is not balanced. That is not the game teaching me how to play the game better. There's no way I could have done this perfectly on my first try. Also, the combat forms will use rocket launchers and explosives at point-blank range. Why? Because they don't care. They're an extension of a singular hive mind. The Flood, for the most part, in Halo show up after you've seen every vehicle and weapon type in the game. They will use every weapon type and vehicle in the game. Oh, and certain combat forms have shields because their elite host had a shield. In Halo 3, pure forms were incorporated but they don't seem like much, but they shapeshift into 3 forms. The runner form that clears space like that of a skirmisher, leaping massive distances, either to turn into a tank right in front of you, or cling to a surface really far away from you and turn into a ranged form. The Flood have also had weird damage resistances in the past. In Halo CE and Halo 2, you couldn't use the sniper rifle on Flood forms, because supposedly the bullet traveled through their bodies too fast to damage it, so it would pass right through. I can almost guarantee that's not how that would work. I'm not a scientist, so if there's a gelatinous material that's so malleable, a sniper rifle bullet, a 50 caliber sniper rifle bullet, can pass through it without ripping and damaging large amounts of the material, please let me know in the comments section. I guarantee that doesn't exist, but I'm willing to accept that I might be wrong. In Halo 2, you can't melee them without a brute shot or an energy sword. Combine all this with the sheer number of Flood you deal with at any given time, and trust me, it can become a chore after prolonged exposure. At one point in Combat Evolved, I lost track of how many Flood combat forms with shotguns I had killed in a row, in a very small, confined room, only to get killed by another one the second I thought I had a moment of reprieve. The reason I like Quarantine Zone is because most of it is a vehicle portion, and you get a bunch of Spec Op elites to help you out. Confined spaces only make the Flood portions worse. I think that's why deep down everyone hates Cortana, and why I personally hate High Charity. Hopefully the big open spaces of Infinite's campaign can help alleviate this. You know, I'd be cool with the Flood being an Infinite, but I hope they don't ever reveal if it's true or not. We have no confirmation as of now, so if they don't show up as an enemy type, I won't be disappointed, but if they do, I just don't want to be spoiled. One of the coolest things about Combat Evolved was not knowing the Flood are in the game at all. The best thing about the Flood in Combat Evolved was how you were first introduced to them. The Covenant forces running for their lives from an enemy you don't see. It's just shadows in the distance, till you venture deeper and deeper into the lower levels of Installation 04. I'd also hope we got more variety amongst Flood forms. The Infection and Carrier forms are fine. I don't see many ways to alter or improve upon their model in the future. The Combat forms could use some modern touch-ups, however. I feel like it's very vague about whether or not the Flood's mutated appendage, like their big weapon arm, is it a whipping tendril effect, or is it hard? Is it 3 sticks? Is it like a melee attack involving cutting and slashing? Is it a claw? I don't know. Maybe make it both and like make it different per combat form. Maybe some combat forms use tendrils that can grab you and it pulls them towards you quicker. Others have slower and heavier melee, but it does more damage, and it can like maybe displace you or throw you around. Also, maybe more than 3 models recycled over and over. You know, if they can improve upon the pure forms, I would love that. I always hated the design of the grasshopper things, the runners. It always felt easy to stop them from becoming something else. The tanks feel like they just absorb ammo. The ranged spiky thing they turned into does its job well. In fact, maybe a little too well. They're definitely one of my least favorite enemies, up there with jackal snipers. But at the same time, they can't move. So as annoying as they are in certain situations, like Cortana, in open areas, they're practically useless. If we could get some new pure forms, I think that'd be great. Just some things we haven't seen before would be awesome. Maybe, you know, they can't make combat forms out of things that are supposedly too small. What if the Flood slaps a bunch of grunts together and makes some sort of mangled giant of grunts? Like, don't the grunts have like a mech suit or something right now? I keep seeing something called like a goblin suit or something. Yeah, Flood goblin suit, essentially, but it's just made of grunts. Or like, what if there was like a worm or a bird or something, and it was just a shielded mass of former jackals, like their wrist gauntlets are still activated. So like when you try to shoot at it, it'll like move its appendages to like block. I think that would be cool. I'm just spitballing here. More than 6 types of Flood is what I'm getting at here. I just really hope that's the case. I'm seeing like Dying Light 2 post all these like, you know, this is a new special infected form that you're gonna face. I think the Flood could use some new special infected forms. The reality of the situation is the Flood is the biggest problem in the Halo mythos. And I wouldn't be surprised if they show up in the next Halo game. Especially considering they're in Halo Wars 2 alongside the Banished. I just hope playing against them is more fun than it was before. The combat forms are a bit repetitive and overwhelming. I'm kind of hoping they rely more on unique, new Flood attacks rather than just spamming power weapons at us. Or if they stay the same, make pure forms more unique and crazy. Make them fly, make them run at you like a feline or a canid. It doesn't all have to be insectile. Make species that don't ordinarily turn into combat forms into new or unique combat forms. Jackals have similar mass to humans. They have hollow bones, yes, but they're like 6 feet tall. I'm like 5'10". A jackal is taller than me. I'm pretty sure if I can make a combat form, a jackal could as well. The extended media has all these different masses and ways the Flood can look. Mouths just congening from the wall like a mixture of Alien and Dead Space. Let's see some of that, because I love the Flood. I know some missions are a bit much, but I love the concept, the idea of standing up against this force that beat our ancient ancestors. The idea that Mjolnir armor is 15 armor classes down from the bare minimum for a Forerunner to fight the Flood. And Chief still held his own on Installation 04. He's been fighting the Flood throughout the Halo storyline. The Arbiter pushed through the Sentinel wall, taking down the barrier where the UNSC and Tartarus and his brutes both failed miserably, only to push deeper into the heart of the quarantine zone and retrieve the Index. There's nothing more rewarding than diving into an outbreak and coming out the other side. That's why even with the problems the Flood bring, I think we as a community still love the Flood. We love to show this ancient galaxy-ending force that we aren't scared, and that we will face this enemy as we face all others.
We shall cut into the heart of this infestation, retrieve the icon, and burn any Flood that stand in our way. The parasite is not to be trifled with. I hope you know what you're doing.